The golden hour had just begun to stretch its light across the quiet streets of Charleston, South Carolina, casting long shadows against the cobblestones outside Maison Leora, one of the city's most exclusive fine dining establishments. Inside, candles flickered on every white linen table, and a soft hum of jazz floated through the air, blending with the clink of crystal and silver. At the host stand, Bryce, a young white man in a tight vest and starched collar, stood with his shoulders back and chin slightly raised. He prided himself on reading people the moment they walked through the door, spotting the regulars, the tourists, and more importantly, those who didn't belong. When the door opened and the black couple stepped into the foyer, elegant, poised, and impeccably dressed, Bryce's smile faltered for just a moment. He glanced them over quickly. The man wore a tailored navy suit, classic but understated, and the woman's emerald dress hugged her frame with effortless grace. Still, Bryce made a split-second decision. He barely nodded. "Good evening," the woman said politely, her voice soft but confident. "Reservation for Wells. Table for two." Bryce didn't check the book. Instead, he gave a thin smile and said, "We're fully committed tonight. Walk-ins are next to impossible." The man blinked. "We're not walk-ins. We reserved a week ago." "I understand," Bryce said curtly, "but tonight's a bit special. It's industry night. A lot of VIPs." He gestured to a side bench. "You're welcome to wait, but it could be a while." The couple exchanged a glance. Not surprised, just disappointed. Like they'd seen this dance before. "We'll wait," the woman said calmly, and they moved to the side, sitting quietly on the velvet bench. Bryce returned to his podium, barely disguising his relief as he turned to greet the next party. A pair of white guests in casual clothes, whom he seated immediately, without checking reservations. From across the room, Chef Julian, the restaurant's owner and head chef, passed through the dining area, scanning the room. His eyes landed briefly on the couple waiting near the door, but he didn't stop. Back on the bench, the woman opened her purse and pulled out a slim black folder. Inside, printed on crisp letterhead, were the official evaluation papers for the Michelin guide. The man leaned over slightly and whispered, "Still want to eat here?" She smiled faintly. "Let's see how far their service goes, when they think we're just another couple walking in from the street." And with that, she closed the folder and tucked it away, a quiet promise of what was to come. From their seat on the bench near the front door, Dr. James Wells and Angela Wells sat with quiet grace. They didn't scroll their phones, they didn't complain, they simply observed every detail, every movement, every interaction from the host stand to the dining room. Years of experience had trained them to read spaces like this in seconds. Bryce, the host, meanwhile, was far too busy trying to impress a group of influencers who'd just arrived. He offered them flutes of complimentary champagne, laughed loudly at bad jokes, and promised something special from the chef, off menu. Not once did he glance at the couple still waiting. Across the room, seated near the window, a pair of seasoned waiters noticed. "That couple by the front," whispered one to the other. "They've been there for nearly 20 minutes. Did Bryce lose their reservation?" "I doubt it," the second replied quietly. "Bryce doesn't lose white reservations." The words weren't said cruelly, just with tired recognition. Still, no one acted. Chef Julian passed by again on his way to check plating on a truffle risotto. The couple caught his eye once more. A flicker of curiosity passed over his face, but it vanished beneath a thick layer of professional detachment. He had guests, he had courses, he didn't have time for interruptions. But Angela Wells saw the way his eyes skimmed past her. She marked it, just as she marked the sommelier, who had approached a party seated after them with an elegant bottle presentation, completely ignoring the fact that two of their highest-profile diners were still sitting at the entrance, unnoticed, unacknowledged. James leaned in and murmured, "How long before you think the server realizes?" Angela's eyes didn't leave the dining room. They won't. Not until Bryce does. And by then, it'll be too late. Behind her calm smile, she was already writing. Not her thoughts, her verdict. Because this wasn't just a visit. This was an evaluation. One that would determine whether Maison Leora joined an elite global list of culinary excellence, or whether it remained exactly what she was seeing now. A restaurant more interested in managing appearances than delivering true hospitality. She glanced at her husband. "Give it 5 more minutes," she whispered. "Then we'll see how they handle the second test." In the quiet hum of the kitchen, Chef Julian plated another course with precision. The foie gras terrine was his pride, marinated for 48 hours, layered with figs and pistachios, finished with a saffron glaze. He handed it off to the server, wiping his hands clean, his mind on reviews, not guests. Meanwhile, Bryce remained at the host stand, still oblivious. He had seated over a dozen parties since the Welleses arrived, never glancing their way. To him, they had faded into the backdrop, just another couple waiting for something they wouldn't get. But not everyone was so blind. Elena, a young server in training who had only been at Maison Leora for 3 weeks, kept looking toward the bench at the front. She'd watched Bryce ignore the couple with subtle but unmistakable disdain. She saw the way they were passed over, and more than anything, she saw the calm dignity they maintained. Not upset, not impatient, just watching. Her curiosity got the better of her. While polishing silverware at the service station, she nudged another server. "Do you know who they are?" "Who?" the server asked. "The couple by the door." The server shrugged. "Reservation mix-up, I think." "No," Elena whispered, leaning in. "They introduced themselves. I overheard. Wells. And the woman had a folder. Official, like from a publisher or something." The server frowned. "Wells, wait, like Angela Wells? The Michelin field inspector?" Elena nodded slowly. The server's face paled. "No way. You're kidding." "She's been to the French Laundry. She's on their East Coast panel. She writes for the Guide." They both turned slightly, just enough to peek toward the entrance. And in that moment, Angela Wells looked directly at them. Not with anger, but with quiet clarity. The message was unmistakable. "You see me now." Panic began to spread in hushed circles among the staff. Servers whispered in corners. One of the managers, a young assistant named Carrie, rushed toward Bryce, pulling him aside. "Do you know who they are?" she hissed. Bryce blinked. "What are you talking about?" "Wells. Angela Wells. You made them wait for almost 30 minutes." His smirk evaporated. He turned quickly, his mouth parting as if to call out. But when he looked at the bench, it was empty. Angela and James Wells were gone, and in their place sat nothing but a half-folded napkin and a single business card that read, "Michelin Guide, Confidential Field Inspection, Angela Wells." Bryce's hands trembled. Somewhere deep in the kitchen, the timer went off on a perfect duck breast. But the air in the restaurant had shifted. This night wouldn't be remembered for its cuisine. It would be remembered for who they failed to serve. The air in Maison Leora shifted from warm elegance to cold panic. Behind the host stand, Bryce stood frozen, the Michelin card still trembling in his hand. His thoughts raced. If it was true, if he had just dismissed a Michelin inspector, then every bow tie in the room, every folded napkin, every $60 appetizer on the menu meant absolutely nothing. He looked around wildly for Chef Julian, who was now plating the final entree for a table of investors from out of town. Carrie, the assistant manager, rushed to the kitchen, her heels clicking like gunshots across the marble. "Chef," she said breathlessly, "you need to come up front. Now." Julian wiped his hands and raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "It's about the couple that was waiting. The ones Bryce ignored." He sighed. "Let me guess. They're somebody's friends?" Carrie handed him the card. He read it once, then again. His hand slowly lowered, face draining of color. "Angela Wells," he said quietly. "They were here for us?" Carrie nodded. They left without being seated. Chef Julian cursed under his breath, pulled off his apron, and marched toward the front of house with the urgency of a man who just realized his career might be standing on a knife's edge. "Where did they go?" he snapped. "They didn't say," Bryce stammered. "They didn't even look upset." "That's worse," Julian growled. "That means they've already made up their minds." Back outside the restaurant, Angela and James Wells stood near the sidewalk, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. A warm coastal breeze stirred Angela's hair as she reviewed the notes on her phone. "You think they noticed yet?" James asked. Angela didn't look up. "They have. I saw the hostess run." He chuckled. "You're ruthless." "No," she said calmly. "I'm precise." A moment later, the restaurant door flew open and Chef Julian stepped out, looking like he had just walked through a fire. "Mrs. Wells," he called, breathless. "Mr. Wells, please, just a moment." Angela turned slowly, perfectly composed. "Yes?" I, I had no idea, Julian said. Please, let us make this right. A table is ready now. Anything you want. On the house. My deepest apologies for the way you were treated. Angela's expression never changed. Thank you, chef. But I think you misunderstand. She stepped closer, her voice soft but unflinching. You don't get second chances on first impressions. Not in this business. Julian swallowed hard. I understand, but the food is only part of the experience, Angela interrupted. Michelin doesn't just reward taste. We reward respect. And tonight your host decided who was worthy of it and who wasn't. Before we ever spoke a word. Julian looked down, defeated. Angela slipped a folded envelope into his hand. The preliminary evaluation is inside. Final scoring will be submitted by the end of the month. Good evening, chef. With that, she turned and walked away. James beside her, their pace calm and steady. Back inside the restaurant, Bryce looked out through the glass doors, watching them disappear into the night. He'd spent the evening deciding who was worth serving. Now, someone else had decided what his service was worth. By sunrise, the story had already started making the rounds. A local food blogger, seated across the dining room that night, had recognized Angela Wells the moment she walked through the doors. She hadn't said anything at the time. She wanted to see how the staff would handle it unprompted. But when the couple never returned from their wait and Chef Julian was spotted rushing out the door in a sweat, she knew something had gone wrong. By morning, the blog post was up. Maison Leora snubs Michelin inspector, unaware she's watching the whole time. The article didn't speculate. It didn't sensationalize. It simply stated the facts, including how many tables were seated before the Wellses, how long they waited, and how staff treated them with cold indifference. Within hours, it was being reshared across Charleston's culinary circles. By noon, every sous chef, line cook, and restaurant manager in the district had read it. By evening, so had the Michelin editorial office. Inside Maison Leora, things moved differently that day. The host's stand was quiet. Bryce uncharacteristically silent. He wasn't offering commentary on guests' outfits or deciding who looked like money. He had read the article too, and now every phone call, every reservation cancellation felt like a personal echo of his judgment. Chef Julian canceled the night's service and held an emergency staff meeting in the dining room. We built this restaurant on precision, he said, on beauty. But none of that matters if we fail at respect. I failed, and so did many of you. He didn't name Bryce directly. He didn't have to. The room knew. One server raised a hand. Is it true? Are we off the Michelin shortlist now? Julian didn't answer. He simply stared at the closed folder in front of him, the one containing Angela's preliminary notes. We don't know, he said. But if we are, we earned it. Outside, business had already begun to slow. Reservations dipped, regulars canceled. Some guests called in pretending to check their bookings, just to ask if the story was true. Maison Leora wasn't just losing stars. It was losing trust. Back in her quiet office miles away, Angela sat at her desk, reviewing final notes. The visit had been short, but it had told her everything she needed to know. James entered with 2 cups of coffee. Think they'll bounce back? Angela took a sip. Maybe, but not the way they hoped. She didn't hate the restaurant. She didn't even hate the chef. But she knew that real stars, the kind Michelin cared about, didn't shine from chandeliers or crystal stemware. They came from dignity, from inclusion, from how a place treated someone when they believed no one was watching. By midweek, Maison Leora had become the cautionary tale of Charleston. The dining room, once buzzing with reservation-only guests, now sat half-empty most nights. Regulars weren't calling back. The staff moved like ghosts, their once sharp choreography broken by discomfort and doubt. The silver didn't shine the same. The music felt out of place. Behind closed doors, Chef Julian sat in his office, staring at the now infamous folded report from Angela Wells. It wasn't scathing. It was worse. It was measured, professional, and damning. Service team not aligned with inclusive hospitality practices. Lack of respect at point of entry. Atmosphere undermined by staff conduct. The food had earned praise. The ambiance, high marks. But the experience had failed. And Michelin didn't just rate dishes. They rated values. Julian ran his hand down his face. tired in a way no espresso could fix. He looked at the staff roster taped to the wall. His eyes stopped on one name, Bryce Whitmore, front of house manager. He called him in. Bryce walked into the office, stiff and pale. You wanted to see me. Julian didn't waste time. You ignored a couple who had a reservation. You seated 6 tables after them, and you lied. Bryce opened his mouth to defend himself, but Julian held up a hand. I don't care what you thought. I care what you did. They didn't look like they belonged, Bryce finally muttered. That was it. That was the root. Julian stood. You're done here, Bryce. There was no explosion, no dramatic firing, just the simple, devastating truth. He had cost them everything. Bryce left quietly. No one in the staff room said goodbye. That evening, Julian addressed the team again. This time, not as their chef, but as a man trying to rebuild. We failed someone who came in peace, who came hungry, who came to honor us. And instead, we gave them suspicion, disrespect, silence. He paused. But this is our turning point. We don't rebuild by chasing stars. We rebuild by acting like we deserve one. From that day forward, every table, every guest, would be greeted with the dignity they should have shown Angela Wells that night. But for now, the restaurant stood in limbo, neither fallen nor redeemed. Waiting. 2 months later, Maison Leora was quieter than it had been in years. The media storm had passed, but the restaurant's glow had dimmed. While some loyal patrons returned, many had moved on, choosing other venues that now prided themselves on the kind of hospitality Maison Leora once took for granted. Chef Julian had changed. He no longer spent his evenings tucked away in the kitchen. He now greeted every table personally. He retrained the entire front-of-house staff. He invited guest speakers to talk about inclusion and racial bias in fine dining. The restaurant hadn't fully recovered, but it had grown. Then, one rainy Thursday night just before closing, the front door opened. 2 guests stepped in, a man and a woman, both dressed casually in sweaters and scarves, rain clinging to their coats. The staff looked up in surprise. It was Angela and James Wells. There was no entourage, no clipboard, no folded inspection folder this time. Just 2 people. Walking into a restaurant they had once left without tasting a single dish. Julian came out from the back, freezing when he saw them. Then he approached slowly. Mrs. Wells, Mr. Wells. Angela offered a calm smile. Good evening, chef. Are you inspecting again? He asked, unsure. No, she said. We're here for dinner. No notes tonight, just hunger. Julian blinked. For a moment, all he could do was stare at the chance he thought he'd never get again. He cleared his throat. We'd be honored to serve you. Your usual table is available. Angela smiled wider. We've never had a usual table here, chef. Julian chuckled, quietly humbled. Then, let's start that tradition tonight. They were seated immediately. No wait, no glances, no hesitation. The staff moved with grace and intention, not out of fear, but out of new habit. Respect had become the norm. The food that night was exquisite, better than their earlier menu. Lighter, bolder, more human. Every plate carried intention. Every pour from the sommelier came with knowledge and warmth. Angela and James laughed, savored, and stayed until the final course. As they left, Julian walked them to the door personally. I just wanted to say, he began, what happened before? I've spent every day trying to make sure it never happens again. Not just here, but anywhere my staff go next. You didn't just review us. You changed us. Angela looked at him thoughtfully, then nodded. Stars fade, she said. Now, but how you treat people? That becomes legacy. And with that, she and James stepped back into the night, the rain having passed, leaving only clean streets behind. Inside Maison Leora, the lights dimmed once more. Not to hide anything, but to quietly begin again.